Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're looking at Afghanistan's quagmire after a huge blast-rocked morning rush hour in the Afghan capital. 120 killed, say sources, in Kabul. With us to talk about it, France 24 correspondent Bilal Sarwari, who's been there throughout for us. Afghan analyst Kaneshka Sorkabi, who's with the IPSE think tank. And from New York, Barnett Rubin of New York University's Center on International Cooperation. Welcome back to all three of you. Just before the break, Kaneshka, you were making the point that it's about much more than just internal factors. It's not just what's going on inside of the government. We were speculating on groups that might be responsible, talking in part one about neighboring Pakistan, where the government is accused of backing some Taliban elements while fighting others, especially in those tribal areas. Afghanistan has been, well, ever since the fall of the Taliban, at the heart, or should we even say before, of this sort of more broad regional battle as we look at that map there. What can you say about it?
So the first thing on the regional side was to see the problem between India and Pakistan, because Pakistan was created in 1947 with two huge border problems. One is Kashmir and the other is the Durand Line. So the problem is that Afghanistan never recognized the Durand Line as a border, and there is a fight between two armies. I think a few days ago, they reopened Pakistan. Police and military reopened the border, but there is a real fight between both countries because Afghanistan refuses to recognize this line, the Durand Line, as a border. So at the same time, there is a big cooperation between Afghanistan and India. For example, China invested in Gwadar port to open the road for the Central Asia, and India invested in Chobar port in Iran with Afghanistan to open the road to the Central Asia for the new Silk Roads. So there is a geopolitical in the Central Asia, which is very complicated and it's huger than the Afghan government capabilities. So at this point, everybody is waiting the international community, and especially the US side, the US government, administration, and the European Union. And at the same time, you see that there's also some problems between Russia and the United States in Afghanistan, because NATO was accusing Russia to support Taliban. And at the same time, there is some pressure between China, India, and Iran. When there's a problem and the deal between Iran and the United States, of course, Iran will support some Taliban or some terrorist group. I don't know what's exactly Taliban, really, to be honest. I don't know what's exactly Daesh. But what I know is I spent a lot of time there. But the thing is, there's terrorist bases in the tribe zone in Pakistan. And everybody knows now that in Pakistan, they're playing a very bad game, because the situation in Pakistan is not very stable now, and they're sending terrorists in Afghanistan to push the Afghan government to take political decision, to push the Afghan government to say, don't cooperate with India, for example. So that's geopolitical war. So, of course, in the Afghan side, and you see in the level of national level, of course, there is a lot of messes. And, of course, we have a lot of mess in France and in the US and every country. But the thing is, we should not say that all the fault is in the Afghan side. We have to share this responsibility.
Barnett Rubin, a lot of people, and it's not the first time on this show where we've heard people point the finger at Pakistan. What can Islamabad be doing differently?
Well, I'll give a short answer to that, but then I'd like to put it in perspective. The Pakistan military believes that it faces a very serious threat from the Indian presence in Afghanistan. I don't believe that it does, but they believe that. And therefore, they are using the Afghan Taliban and other groups to try to put pressure on and destabilize what they see as the current pro-Indian government, and very importantly, on the U.S. and other international forces that are protecting that government and which they see as being allied with India. And remember, the U.S. and India are increasing their strategic cooperation as well. It's not just about the Afghan government. Pakistan is much more worried about the United States than it is about the Afghan government.
The Pakistanis, who their military gets a lot of its weaponry from the U.S.
Yes, that is true. And the United States cannot get into Afghanistan, which is a landlocked country, except through Pakistan. So it's a very complicated relationship, not one of simply being for or against. So both countries have to balance that. Pakistan, on the other hand, is becoming much more closely linked to China. China does not want Pakistan to support the Taliban. Anyway, I won't go into all these complex details. My main point is if Pakistan saw the government of Afghanistan and the international forces that are supporting it as allies or friends rather than as Indian allied threats to its national interest, it could round up and arrest the Taliban leaders who are inside Pakistan, prevent them from traveling around with weapons. And I'm not saying it could seal the border. It can't seal the border. But it could prevent major military operations from being launched across the border and lower the level of violence. That would not solve the political problems of Afghanistan. Afghanistan has a lot of political problems that are going to persist for a very long time. By the way, Afghanistan is not the only country in which that is true. You might look at the United States as well. But that it would help if if the Afghans could, engage in disputes over those problems without being caught up in internationally funded violence and terrorism. That's what we should be aiming for in the short to medium term.
And when you think back to the days early in the Obama administration when the U.S. Special Envoy was Richard Holbrooke and he was traveling back and forth to Afghanistan and Pakistan, what could have been done differently?
Well, I was working for him and I was traveling for him back and forth to Afghanistan and Pakistan. But you should not get the idea that Richard Holbrooke was in charge of all U.S. policy in Afghanistan. By the way, I disagreed with him on a number of issues. I won't go into that. But in any case, the main lines of U.S. policy on Afghanistan were always set by negotiations between the president and the U.S. military. My view is that we have always put too much emphasis on the military battle inside Afghanistan, which I might say is almost marginal compared to the geopolitical regional issues, because as long as the Taliban have refuge in a surrounding country, in a neighboring country, it really doesn't matter what happens on the front line in Afghanistan. And as long as most of the neighbors, not only Pakistan, but as Bilal Sarwari said, Iran and Russia really don't want the U.S. military in Afghanistan permanently because they see it as a threat, they will not allow Afghanistan to be stabilized as a military base of the United States. So really the most important thing is a diplomatic and economic approach to trying to de-escalate, I won't say solve, de-escalate those problems so that Afghanistan can become a country that connects those neighbors rather than a country where they all pursue their conflicts.
Yeah, that brings us squarely to the role of the current U.S. administration. Bilal Sarwari, right now there are some 13,000 NATO troops in Afghanistan. Most of those are American, far fewer, of course, than in the past, but still. And the United States saying it's thinking of increasing that number by some 5,000 troops. It recently dropped that so-called mother of all bombs on a Taliban hideout. Is the U.S. Does this U.S. administration, in your view, have a different plan than the previous one? How does it feel from where you are?
The Afghan officials that I've spoken to, they said that these extra U.S. forces would certainly prevent the fall of major provincial capitals that have been surrounded by the Taliban. And I think Afghanistan, unfortunately, will be relying on a foreign air force. Air power in Afghanistan has been counterproductive, but at the same time, it is the only way to prevent the fall of your major cities. I think one thing that I want to mention that the Taliban have done, they've expanded their areas of recruitment in northeastern Afghanistan, in eastern Afghanistan, two major areas in Afghanistan that do provide soldiers for the Afghan National Army and the Afghan National Police. So one of the problems for Afghanistan, I think in the long run, no matter how many foreign troops or Western troops are deployed, if you have problems recruiting your soldiers and your policemen and you continue to lose them in big numbers, I don't think this is sustainable at all. And what happens when the Taliban take control of more ground and more area? Afghanistan loses all the infrastructure, all the millions of dollars invested by international community, all the blood and treasure is wasted. So I think what Afghanistan right now is struggling as a government, as a country, is to keep the Taliban away, whether that's major highways or provincial capitals that have been surrounded. Then you have Al-Qaeda that has survived in the Pakistan-Afghanistan region for a long time, and they have a very close relationship with the Haqqani network, for example, for generations, and not just the last 10 years or so. I would actually want to add that when the Pakistani army carried out the operations Al-Bulaz in Waziristan, they did not target the Haqqani network. They were spared. And this operation took place at a time when international forces had left the country. The drawdown actually had ended. In Afghanistan and many other countries in Kabul had been asking Pakistan all those years to carry out those operations. So Pakistan's strategy of countering the so-called good and bad Taliban is actually having a very serious impact on how the situation is here in Afghanistan. Could the Taliban survive without the support that they get from Pakistan as a group? Where is Sirajuddin Haqqani? Where is the Haqqani network leadership? And, you know, I think in terms of evidence, in terms of the attacks that they've launched, I think it's hardly a secret that the Americans, for example, have told the Pakistanis, both publicly and privately, that, look, you need to stop doing this. So I think for Afghanistan, what all of this means, that the people of Afghanistan continue to lose their lives on a daily basis. The people of Afghanistan cannot go about their daily life anymore. Education is paralyzed. You've got 400 schools that are shut. And I think the people in this country really, really deserves a normal life. And if we have more troops, if we have more bombardment, if we have got more war, without really controlling the Pakistan side and without really seeing some sort of reform here, then that will only mean, unfortunately, more bloodshed and more fighting. And then you have to ask the question, well, what is the end goal? What exactly do you want to achieve in this country?
Barnett Rubin, let me get your reaction to what Bilal just said, because saying effectively that, well, attempts to negotiate with certain factions of the Taliban don't mean much if you don't tighten the screws on those groups like the Haqqani network operating out of neighboring Pakistan. You have a new administration in Washington with senior brass at the Pentagon, at the Defense Department, that knows Afghanistan well. Are things going to be different?
I think they'll be. I don't think they'll be different in any good way, because the military brass knows Afghanistan only in one way. That is, they know Afghanistan as fighters against the Taliban, and that is a part of fighters against the Afghan Taliban inside Afghanistan. They do not know Afghanistan politically. They don't know Afghanistan and the region, and therefore our policy is now being proposed purely by the military, because the State Department is barely functioning. Not that the State Department always does such a great job either. And of course, bear in mind that our government is currently, the U.S. government, in a state of considerable turmoil. It's sad for Afghanistan that they have no alternative but to rely on the United States right now. But it's very hard to predict what the United States will do or how reliable a partner it could possibly be under the current administration.
So you're saying that under this administration, the solutions will be military, but what will the Pentagon's stance be when it comes to Pakistan?
Well, the Pentagon's stance is to tell Pakistan not to do this, and maybe they will reduce some of the assistance they give to the military. But the fact is, the United States has, in my view, has less leverage over Pakistan than Pakistan has over the United States, because the only route that the United States has into Afghanistan is through Pakistan. Just look at a map. The only alternatives are through Russia or Iran, and our relationship with those two countries is not such that we can treat them as alternatives. We actually used Russia and Central Asia as an alternative in 2011 when I was in the government, and our relations with Pakistan deteriorated. In addition, China is building a huge project, what some people say the largest in the history of the world, called the Belt and Road Initiative, which includes an economic corridor through Pakistan worth tens of billions of dollars, which means that it is China much more than the United States that could conceivably have some leverage over Pakistan. But without our having a really functional diplomacy, we are not able to engage with China to work with it to see what we can do about Pakistan.
Kanishka Sorkabi, you agree that Pakistan has more leverage over the U.S. than the U.S. has over Pakistan?
Yeah, I remember a few years ago, near this place, there was an attack, big attack against the American embassy, and everybody knew that people who did this attack was terrorists who came from Pakistan. So some people in the American administration were asking if, as a war declaration, if they should do or not something. The thing is, when the American administration put Pakistan under pressure, Pakistan is going on the China side. And that's the thing. The last decision of the American Congress was to stop a huge budget for weapons to Pakistan. So the thing is, it's not the new National Security Advisor of Mr. Trump said we will have a new strategy which will include Pakistan. So everybody is waiting what they will decide. But the point is that big powers and powerful countries have to decide together for peace in Afghanistan. If not, there not will be peace for the Afghan people, because last year more than 7,000 Afghan security forces lost their lives and around 3,000 civilians. So it's too much. And a lot of people who are fighting are not Afghans. They are from Pakistan, they are from Central Asia, and they are from other countries. So the war that we see in Afghanistan is the war that we have not in Europe and in the US. So the fight against ISIS, the Islamic State, is going to be over in Syria, maybe soon. So they are not powerful. So things are coming in Afghanistan, and we see that terrorist groups are going in the north side and the Central Asia side. That's why Russia is worried about that. So we see in the same time this pressure on the one side and the other side, but it's not cooperation. Big powers didn't decide together to say, okay, let's make a peaceful Afghanistan. There's messes, there's not enough good cooperation, and there's different interests for different countries and different powers. And Afghan people, at least from since 40 years, are paying the international mess.
Bilal Sarawi, from where you are, is that how you see it?
Well, I think I want to go back to what the United States could do to tackle the Pakistan problem when it comes to Afghanistan. What the U.S. has been doing, it's incentivizing bad behavior, despite billions of dollars that Pakistan gets as a country from the United States. You find bin Laden inside Pakistan. I think the people of Afghanistan have suffered in terms of losing their lives on a daily basis. Any other country in the world would find it extremely difficult to accept a neighbor like Pakistan that continues to undermine what the people of Afghanistan are trying to put their lives together. Afghanistan started a new journey in 2001. It's a fight for peace. Of course, this country has many problems. Corruption is one of them, but you really can't live here when you live in a bad neighborhood. And there's also another difference. Anywhere else, you've got a country that has an army and intelligence. In Pakistan, it's the army and intelligence that really has the state of Pakistan. And I don't think it's only Afghanistan where the Pakistani army relies on Islamic extremism or these groups as a tool of foreign policy. I think you can find a lot of those examples. And just not as an Afghan journalist, as an Afghan reporter, but as an Afghan, coming from a corner in this country, we have seen how difficult it is when IEDs, the material for IEDs come from Pakistan, when there are cross-border attacks, when you know that the leadership lives inside Pakistani cities that is protected. And I always wonder what sort of Taliban we would have been talking perhaps a few years back if they did not have the protection, sometimes very open protection of the Pakistani army and intelligence services. I think that would unfortunately mean for Afghanistan that it's on its own, despite signing the bilateral security agreement as an insurance for a better future. I think Afghanistan continues to experience bloodshed. We are seeing all these attacks by different groups, and the bilateral security agreement was signed specifically as an insurance, as a guarantee that Afghanistan will be actually safe from some of these acts by its neighbors.
All right, and on a day like this, our thoughts, of course, are with the people of Kabul and with those who suffer at the hands of militants on both sides of that border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Bilal Sarawi, many thanks for joining us from Kabul. I want to thank as well Kanishka Sorkabi and Barnett Rubin in New York City. Stay with us. Our Media Watch segment is next. Let me say hello to James Creedon.
Hi, François.
A lot of indignation on the part of Afghans for the fact that this truck managed to get into this secured area. It wasn't supposed to be there during morning rush hour.
That's right, and so you can see a certain amount of that indignation on social media. I'm going to start first off, though, with some images showing the aftermath of the carnage, obviously avoiding overly graphic images, but some Reuters photography has caught my eye on social media. This is a photo by Omar Sobhani for Reuters, and it captures the horror and senselessness of war, according to this tweet here. You can see a man outstretched on the ground looking in despair, and this is another Reuters image as well, I suppose capturing the just confusion and upset in the aftermath, François. This is an image that shows the crater caused by that massive blast, which gives an idea of the magnitude of the blast. And indeed, another image I think that shows that quite well is the exterior of the German embassy. You can see all of the windows blasted inward, and indeed the German Foreign Ministry has confirmed that several people were injured. So I suppose those photos give a sense of the devastation in the aftermath, and indeed there's a lot worse than that. There's a lot worse than that selection on social media, but I said I'd spare you the goriness of it all. Some reactions, of course, official reactions, this from the Afghan government. High-ranking officials called in for an emergency meeting. The former Premier Hamid Karzai also responding on social media. I condemn in the strongest terms the terrorist attack in Kabul, and you've had world leaders the world over responding. Just moving on to another angle that you often see on social media, at least amongst those who aren't directly impacted, which is the whole notion of not an unequal coverage. I suppose it's certainly not the case for international news channels, which I think do tend to cover as equally as possible but attacks like this. But I suppose national media sometimes will relegate overseas news down the menu. My deepest sympathies to those in Manchester, but how can a bombing in Kabul killing more than 3 times the number barely register? I suppose, again, depends on what media you're looking at. Whether Kabul, Manchester or Baghdad, blood is the same colour. Grief has no accent. And here in France, some tweeting Anne Hidalgo saying, what about the Eiffel Tower? Is it going to be shut down tonight? This is a debate that has been coming back a lot.
Anne Hidalgo, the mayor of Paris.
That's right. And that debate comes back frequently now, because I suppose once you make symbolic gestures for one incident, you kind of, there's pressure to do it, I suppose, for every incident.
I remember Pakistani officials, after there was the big attack, that horrific attack on that school in Rawalpindi, saying, why wasn't the Eiffel Tower in the colours of Pakistan after
That's right. And indeed, what colour will the Eiffel Tower be tonight, says that tweet. Anne Hidalgo responding, not directly to that tweet, but to, I suppose, a number of people making that comment, saying, look, actually it will be shut off tonight. The Eiffel Tower has a Twitter account. I didn't know that until today. Maybe I should have known, but it confirms that it will be shut off tonight. As it was last night, François, for the 2 car blasts in Baghdad. And I mean, perhaps we're going slightly off topic now, but just as I'm on this point, last week in the aftermath of the Manchester attack, a Fox News commentator said, what exactly is accomplished by making the Eiffel Tower go dark. How does that improve the situation with homegrown and migrant jihadists? J.K. Rowling quite famously, or at least famously responded, saying it accomplishes the aim of expressing compassion, respect and solidarity. Do you sneer at funeral flowers too? I suppose what can you do from afar except try to express compassion?
Your reaction to this, Kaneshka? Does it?
So Afghan lives doesn't matter. So what should I say more? Right. Since the war terror, which was started by Bush, more than 1.5 million people have been killed in different countries, Iraq, Afghanistan, now Syria. So what's our decision? Where is our strong commitment for peace and for stability in the world?
Yeah.
Right, and that I suppose those comments are coming out quite strongly on social media as well. The sense that not all lives are treated equally, despite the fact that there is a sense morally that they should be.
All right. Well, I want to thank you, James Creedon.
And there is more than 90 years of friendly relation between France and Afghanistan.
Yeah,
a friendship, and there is a friendship treaty between France and Afghanistan. So I think the new government has to take serious decisions and strong decisions.
To show its solidarity and support.
Yes, and the Europe side also.
All right, I want to thank you, James Creedon. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.